The skies above Shelter Point were choked with ash-gray clouds, a reflection of the chaos brewing below. Once a quiet military-controlled safe zone surrounded by reinforced barriers and patrolled by armed guards, it had become a boiling pot of tension, fear, and uncertainty. Supplies were low, tempers high, and the sound of groaning from beyond the fences was growing louder each night. Eli Warren stood near the inner perimeter, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning the treeline. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained for this. A former EMT with a sharp mind and steady hands, Eli had survived the initial wave of the outbreak by helping others, first on the streets of his hometown, then on the road, and now here in this makeshift stronghold. He glanced at his wristwatch. 6:42 a.m. The gate schedule had shifted. 2 hours early. Something was wrong. Eli, a voice called from behind. He turned to see Captain Marlowe approaching, her uniform stained with dust and sweat. She was a no-nonsense leader, respected by many, feared by more. Her face, usually composed, carried the weight of bad news. Report to command tent. Now. Eli's stomach tightened, but he nodded, quickening his pace. As they walked, the low-frequency thuds of distant detonations echoed in the hills, controlled demolitions used to clear zombie clusters. Or at least that's what they'd been told. Inside the command tent, the air was thick with stale coffee and static-filled radio chatter. Maps of the region were spread across the table, red pins marking failed outposts, blue ones marking evac routes, most crossed out. Major Torres pointed to a flashing dot on the digital display. They broke through at Gate 3. 15 infected, maybe more. We've deployed Delta Squad, but we need a fallback plan if they breach the secondary barrier. Eli looked around, confused. Why am I here? Captain Marlowe replied, because you're the only one here who's seen firsthand what the infected become after 2 weeks. You know how they evolve. Eli clenched his fists. He remembered the hillside clinic. The screams. The patients who didn't stay dead. They're not just shambling bodies anymore, he said quietly. They learn. They mimic. They wait. A cold silence fell over the tent. Suddenly, a distant explosion rattled the ground beneath them, followed by rapid gunfire. Shouts echoed from the outer wall. Gate 3 is gone, a young soldier screamed into the radio. Oh God, they're climbing. Panic set in. Eli grabbed his med bag without waiting for orders. I'm heading to the medical tent. If this place falls, we'll need to evacuate the wounded. Marlowe nodded. Make it fast. We'll hold as long as we can. Outside, the world had shifted from tense to apocalyptic. Smoke curled into the sky. Civilians were being ushered toward the evacuation shuttles, rusting armored trucks barely holding together. Screams rang out from the east wall. Eli sprinted toward the medical tent, weaving through soldiers and survivors. Inside, chaos. Stretchers lined the walls. 2 nurses tried to calm a boy with a fractured leg. An older man convulsed on the floor, bite mark visible on his neck. Don't let him turn, one of the nurses yelled. Eli injected a sedative into the man's arm, buying a few more minutes. The perimeter alarm blared. They've breached the inner wall, a voice yelled from outside. Eli's blood ran cold. He turned to the younger nurse, Jen. Get the mobile med kits. We're moving. But where? Anywhere that's not here. The first infected slammed into the tent canvas moments later, snarling, clawing at the seams. Its eyes weren't dull like the earlier ones, these eyes were aware. Hungry. Fast. Eli kicked over a supply cart, blocking the opening. Move. Jen, the boy, and the second nurse scrambled through the rear flap, Eli covering them with his sidearm. Another infected burst through, crawling low, too fast. Eli fired twice. It dropped. But it wasn't alone. He fled through the back, the group following the path toward the southern fence. The noise was overwhelming now, gunfire, screams, flesh tearing. And then. A new sound. Helicopter blades. Eli looked up. A transport chopper hovered beyond the fence line. A soldier waved them forward. "Over here," he shouted. Relief surged, but only for a second. Dozens of infected, attracted by the sound, poured from the treeline, sprinting on all fours, eyes locked on the aircraft and on the survivors. Eli tightened his grip on his weapon, planted his feet, and turned to face the charging horde. "When all else fails," he muttered, "you stand and fight." To be continued in Part 2. Would you like me to continue with Part 2 next? Eli's heart pounded against his ribs as the horde closed in, snarling and snapping like wild beasts unleashed from hell. The sharp crack of his sidearm echoed across the scorched clearing, each shot a brief plea for survival. But the undead were relentless, too many, too fast, and terrifyingly smart. Beside him, Jen clutched the boy tightly, her face pale but determined. The nurse's breaths came in quick gasps, the strain of constant running in terror etched into every line. The old woman, frail but fierce, limped forward, supported by the second nurse. The helicopter pilot, a grizzled man with a tight jaw and eyes that had seen too much, shouted, "Get on. Now!" The armored ramp clattered down, offering the only chance of escape. Soldiers covering the perimeter fired burst after burst, thinning the attacking wave but unable to stop it outright. Eli made a split-second decision. He covered the retreat. Pulling a hunting knife from his belt, he swung fiercely at the nearest creature, slicing deep into its decaying flesh. It hissed and lunged, but Eli ducked, dodged, and struck again. More arrived, 2, 3 at a time. The whine of the helicopter's blades grew louder, a beacon of hope amid the nightmare. The old woman tripped. Without thinking, Eli dove forward, catching her before she hit the dirt. "You okay?" he barked. "I've been through worse," she said grimly, pulling herself up. Behind them, a soldier fell, grabbed and dragged beneath the ravenous teeth of the undead. The boy screamed. Eli's mind raced. The ramp was almost full. "Go! Now!" Eli urged, pushing the small group up the incline. Jen helped the old woman aboard. The pilot waved once more, then glanced at Eli. "You're coming too," he said. Eli hesitated, eyes flicking back to the growing mob. Another step, another second, and the infected would overwhelm them. With a grunt, he scrambled up the ramp. The doors slammed shut. The chopper lifted off, shuddering violently as bullets and claws battered the metal sides. Through the reinforced windows, Eli watched the shattered remains of Shelter Point shrink beneath them, engulfed in a nightmare of smoke and fire. The pilot wiped sweat from his brow. "We're heading to the Highlands outpost. It's secure, for now." Eli sank into a seat, chest heaving. The adrenaline slowly ebbed, leaving a raw exhaustion. The boy's sobs finally stopped. Jen whispered words of comfort. The old woman stared silently ahead, her eyes hollow with grief. "Why did it have to end like this?" she asked softly. Eli had no answer. Hours later, in the cold dimness of the Highlands outpost briefing room, the atmosphere was tense. Survivors and soldiers gathered around flickering monitors, their faces lit by blue light and haunted by loss. Major Torres paced in front of the group, voice grim. "Shelter Point was our last major stronghold. Its fall means the undead are advancing faster than predicted. We need to adapt, and fast." Eli raised his hand, surprising himself. "Sir," he said, voice steady despite the fatigue, "I saw them change out there. They're not the same anymore. The infected are coordinating. Using strategies. They learn from us." Torres stopped pacing and stared. "We've seen the signs," he admitted, but no one believed it. "The frontline reports have been conflicting." Eli nodded. "We need new tactics. We can't fight them the way we did in the first wave." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the soldiers, a woman with a scar across her cheek, spoke up. "What do you suggest?" Eli took a deep breath. "We need to outthink them. Set traps, use bait, control their movement. We can't just survive, we have to turn the tide. That night, Eli sat alone on the outpost's roof, the chill air biting through his thin jacket. The stars were faint, hidden behind a veil of gray clouds. He traced the faint lines of his hands, the same hands that had saved lives and taken lives. A low growl broke the silence. From the distant woods, he could hear the unmistakable moans of the undead, a grim reminder that the war was far from over. Eli closed his eyes. He thought of the faces lost, friends, strangers, the innocent caught in a nightmare. He thought of the families waiting, hoping somewhere out there. And he thought of one truth. When all else fails, you fight. Because surrender is not an option. Because hope, no matter how small, must live. Because the world depends on those who refuse to give up. Would you like me to continue with part 3 now? The Highlands outpost was supposed to be a refuge, a last line of defense against the relentless tide of the undead. Instead, it felt like a cage, shrinking day by day under the shadow of the growing war. Eli woke early, the cold biting through the thin blankets that offered little comfort. His mind replayed the chaos of Shelter Point on a loop, the screams, the fear, the faces of those he couldn't save. He sat up and rubbed his eyes, already aching from the restless night. Outside, the perimeter was alive with activity. Soldiers prepared weapons, checked ammo, and reinforced barricades. The hum of generators and the occasional barked order filled the air. Captain Marlowe approached, her expression softer than usual. "Eli," she said, "we need you. There's a reconnaissance team heading out at first light. We want you with them." Eli frowned. "Recon? I'm not a soldier." Marlowe's eyes were steady. "You're the closest thing we have to someone who understands what we're up against. If anyone can spot how they're evolving, it's you." Eli nodded slowly, a mix of dread and determination settling over him. The morning was thick with fog as the recon team assembled. 5 soldiers, lean and grim-faced, checked weapons and supplies. Eli felt the weight of their silent judgment, an EMT among fighters. The plan was simple yet dangerous: scout a recently overrun town a few miles north, retrieve any intel or survivors, and avoid drawing attention. The team moved out, stepping cautiously through the abandoned streets. The eerie silence pressed in, broken only by the distant groans of the undead echoing like a storm on the horizon. Eli's senses sharpened. He scanned the windows of shattered buildings, the overturned cars, the crumbling storefronts. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a threat. Suddenly, the lead soldier froze, raising a hand. "Movement," he whispered. Ahead, near an overturned bus, a small group of figures shuffled slowly. But these weren't the slow, shambling infected Eli remembered, they moved with purpose. Eyes bright, bodies twisted but coordinated, they scanned the area, searching. Eli's breath hitched. "They've changed," he muttered. "They're hunting." The recon team crouched low, weapons ready. The creatures moved closer, their heads tilting as if listening, calculating. One of them suddenly sprinted, low and fast, straight toward the team. Chaos erupted. Shots rang out, echoing sharply in the empty street. Eli dove behind a rusted car, heart pounding. The sprinting creature was down, but the others began to spread out, flanking the team. "Fall back," the leader ordered. The team retreated, firing as they moved. Eli's hands shook as he aimed his rifle, picking off one creature after another, but the undead seemed endless. Suddenly, a piercing scream rang out behind them. Eli turned to see a young soldier grabbed and pulled into the shadows, disappearing beneath the writhing mass. "No!" Eli shouted, charging forward, but the others pulled him back. "Get out of here," the leader barked. Reluctantly, Eli retreated with the survivors, heart aching. Back at the outpost, the mood was grim. The reconnaissance had confirmed their worst fears: the undead were evolving rapidly, becoming more intelligent and aggressive. Eli sat in the medical bay, tending to the wounded soldier who had narrowly escaped death. "Why are they changing?" Eli wondered aloud. The soldier shook his head. "Maybe the virus is mutating. Or maybe they're adapting to survive, just like us." Eli's eyes darkened. If they learn, then we have to learn faster. Captain Marlowe entered, holding a small device, the kind used to scan bodies for infection. We're running tests on samples from the field, she said. But the data is limited. We need more time. Eli looked up. Time is the one thing we don't have. That night, Eli stood on the outpost's watchtower, staring into the darkness. The wind carried faint moans from the forest, reminders that death was always just beyond the light. His thoughts drifted to the people he'd lost, the ones still out there, and the uncertain future ahead. A shadow flickered near the fence. Eli raised his rifle, finger on the trigger. But then, a figure stepped into the light, a lone survivor, ragged and weary, hands raised in peace. Eli lowered his weapon slowly. The war wasn't just against the undead anymore. It was a fight for every scrap of humanity left in a world gone mad. Would you like me to continue with part 4? You said. The stranger's eyes were hollow but alert, reflecting the harsh light from the outpost's lamps. Eli studied him carefully, every instinct screaming caution. In a world overrun by the undead, trust was a luxury few could afford. Name's Marcus, the man said, voice rough like gravel. I've been on the run for weeks. Eli glanced over his shoulder at the watchtower crew. Captain Marlowe appeared, her expression unreadable. We don't have much time, she said quietly. Whoever he is, we can't ignore him. Marcus swallowed hard, then explained in hurried breaths. I was part of a militia near the city. When everything fell apart, we scattered. I lost my family. I've been trying to find others, survivors willing to fight back. Eli nodded slowly. We all want that. But how do we know you're not leading more trouble? Marcus gave a bitter smile. I'm no saint. But I'm not one of those monsters. The air thickened with tension. Then, from the shadows, a sudden scream pierced the night. Soldiers scrambled to their posts as alarms blared through the outpost. They're here, Marlowe growled. Outside the walls, a swarm had arrived, larger than anything they'd seen in weeks. The undead surged forward, battering the barricades with brutal force. The outpost shuddered under the assault. Defend the perimeter, Marlowe shouted. Eli grabbed his rifle, heart hammering. The fight had come to their doorstep. The first wave crashed against the walls, snarling and clawing like a living nightmare. The soldiers fired relentlessly, but the horde was endless. Eli moved with practiced precision, picking off the closest attackers. But the creatures were more aggressive than ever, leaping, twisting, and coordinating in ways that defied all logic. Amid the chaos, Marcus fought like a man possessed, his movements fierce and calculated. Eli found himself fighting side by side with the stranger, their efforts forming a fragile shield against the onslaught. Suddenly, a breach, one of the gates buckled and gave way. The undead poured through the opening like a flood. Fall back. To the inner defenses, Marlowe ordered. The survivors retreated, regrouping behind makeshift barricades inside the compound. Smoke and screams filled the air as the battle raged. Eli's mind raced. The outpost wouldn't hold much longer. We need a plan, he shouted to Marcus over the din. Marcus nodded grimly. I know a place. An old underground bunker, a few miles from here. It's fortified, could be our last chance. With no better option, the survivors prepared to evacuate. Jen and the boy joined Eli, their faces pale but determined. Marlowe handed Eli a map, her eyes sharp with urgency. Lead the group. Get to that bunker. Eli glanced back at the burning outpost, a pang of loss stabbing his chest. Let's move, he said, voice steady. The group slipped into the night, moving cautiously through debris-strewn streets. Every shadow seemed to hide danger. The distant moans of the undead grew louder, echoing like a storm on the wind. At one point, the group was forced to take shelter in an abandoned store when a smaller horde crossed their path. Eli crouched behind a counter, watching the creatures shuffle past with haunting patience. He whispered, "We're lucky this time." But luck was a fragile thing. As dawn crept over the horizon, the survivors reached the entrance to the bunker, an old steel door half buried beneath rubble. Marcus pried it open with a crowbar, revealing a dark stairwell leading deep underground. The air inside was cool and stale, but safer than the world above. Inside the bunker, the group found remnants of old supplies, canned food, water, and weapons. For the first time in weeks, they allowed themselves a moment of respite. Eli sat beside Jen and the boy, exhaustion washing over him. Marcus stood near the entrance, scanning for any signs of danger. "We'll be safe here, for now," Marcus said, voice low. "But the war's far from over," Eli replied. "And we have to be ready," Jen added, eyes fierce. Eli looked around the dim room, feeling a strange mix of hope and fear. The fight against the undead wasn't just survival anymore. It was a war for the future. A war they might just win. "Would you like me to continue with part 5? You said." The bunker's cold walls seemed to close in as the survivors settled in. The air was thick with exhaustion, and something else, uncertainty. Eli sat near a flickering lantern, the dim light casting shadows on his weathered face. His hands trembled slightly as he cleaned his rifle, but his eyes remained sharp, scanning every corner of the room. Marcus moved restlessly, pacing back and forth. "We can't stay here forever," he said quietly. "They'll find us." Eli looked up. "How long?" Marcus shook his head. "No telling. But the undead are spreading faster than ever. More intelligent, more organized." Jen placed a hand on Eli's shoulder, grounding him. "We need to think about survivors out there, others like us." The boy, quiet until now, spoke softly. "Will we be safe here?" Eli forced a smile. "For now, yes. But we have to be ready for anything." That night, Eli found himself unable to sleep. He crept to the bunker's narrow window, peering out into the dark. The forest beyond was silent, but Eli knew better than to trust the quiet. His mind drifted back to Shelter Point, to all the faces lost, friends, strangers, and the unknown. Suddenly, footsteps echoed above. Eli tensed, raising his rifle. "Eli," Marcus called softly. "It's me." Eli lowered the rifle but stayed alert. "We need to talk," Marcus said, voice low. They stepped into a side room, away from the others. "Something's wrong," Marcus confessed. "I haven't told you everything. Before the militia fell, I found out about a secret project, a government effort to control the infection." Eli frowned. "What kind of project?" Marcus glanced over his shoulder, voice dropping. "They were trying to develop a serum, a way to turn the infected back. But it went sideways. The virus mutated faster than expected. And some of the test subjects, they didn't just die." Eli's heart pounded. "You mean the evolving undead?" Marcus nodded grimly. "Exactly. And worse, they're using those test sites to create weapons out of the infected." Eli's mind reeled. So this war isn't just about survival, it's about stopping a nightmare made worse by humans. Back in the main room, Jen noticed Eli's tense expression. "What's going on?" she asked. Eli took a deep breath. "Marcus has information about a government project, something that could explain why the undead are evolving." Jen's eyes widened. "Can we trust him?" Eli hesitated. Trust was a scarce commodity. But Marcus had proven himself during the outpost attack. "We don't have a choice," Eli said finally. "If there's a way to end this, we need to find it." The following morning, the survivors prepared to move again. The bunker was safe, but Eli knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. Marcus pulled out a faded map, tracing a route to an old military research facility several miles east. "That's where the project was based," Marcus said. "If the serum exists, it'll be there." Eli studied the map, weighing the risks. The facility was in a quarantine zone, swarming with the dead and possibly worse. "Then we have to be smart," Eli said. "We'll need weapons, supplies, and a plan." Jen tightened her grip on her backpack. "And allies." If we find survivors who believe us, we can build a force. The boy looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. Can I help? Eli smiled softly. You're braver than you think. As the group packed their gear, Eli took a final look around the bunker. The quiet felt fragile, like the calm before a storm. Stepping outside, the early morning sun bathed the world in an eerie glow. The war was far from over. But for the first time, Eli felt a spark of purpose. When all else fails, sometimes hope is the fiercest weapon of all. Would you like me to continue with part 6? The group moved cautiously through the outskirts of the city, the ruins casting long shadows in the fading light. Eli's heart pounded with every step. The closer they got to the military research facility, the more palpable the danger became. This place was a ghost town even before the outbreak, Marcus muttered. After the quarantine was enforced, no one dared come near. Jen clutched her makeshift weapon tighter. So what exactly are we walking into? Potentially the epicenter of everything, Eli replied grimly. A place where science went too far. The boy followed close behind, eyes wide but determined. The weight of what they were facing settled heavily on all of them. They crossed a shattered bridge and entered the quarantine zone, a forbidding stretch cordoned off with rusted barbed wire and faded warning signs. The silence was oppressive, broken only by distant, haunting groans. Stay alert, Eli whispered. They could be anywhere. As they pressed forward, the ground beneath them was littered with abandoned vehicles, shattered glass, and debris. A cold wind swept through the empty streets, carrying the faint stench of decay. Suddenly, a noise, soft shuffling, came from an alleyway to their right. Eli raised his rifle, signaling for the others to freeze. From the shadows, a lone figure emerged, a survivor, gaunt and dirty, but alive. Wait, the man called out, hands raised. Marcus stepped forward cautiously. Who are you? The stranger's eyes darted nervously. Name's Sam. I've been hiding here since the quarantine started. I know this zone better than anyone. Jen's voice was wary. Why should we trust you? Sam swallowed hard. Because I want out. And I want to help. Despite their hesitation, Eli saw no immediate threat. They allowed Sam to join their group, hoping his knowledge of the area would be an asset. The four of them, Eli, Jen, Marcus, and Sam, advanced toward the research facility, now just blocks away. The building loomed like a forgotten relic, its walls scarred and windows shattered. Remember, Eli said, this place isn't just abandoned. It's dangerous. Inside, the air was stale and cold, punctuated by the faint hum of forgotten machinery. The group moved in silence, alert for any sign of the undead or worse. In a lab filled with overturned desks and cracked monitors, Marcus began searching through files and equipment. This was where they experimented on the infected, he murmured, scanning documents. Trying to find a cure, but they failed, Eli finished. The weight of the truth pressed down on him. Suddenly, the facility shuddered as an alarm unexpectedly blared. A low growl echoed through the halls. Everyone, get ready! Eli shouted. From the shadows, figures emerged, not the slow, mindless creatures they expected, but something more terrifying. The evolved undead. They moved with unnatural speed and cunning, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The group fought desperately, retreating through the corridors as the creatures closed in. Jen fired steadily, covering their backs, while Marcus searched frantically for something, a keycard, a vial, anything. Eli's breath came fast as he fired and dodged, heart hammering in his chest. In the chaos, Sam was knocked down, grabbed by one of the evolved creatures. Sam! Jen screamed, rushing forward. Eli tackled the creature, wrestling it off as Marcus pulled Sam to safety. We can't stay here. Marcus shouted, clutching a small vial he'd found in a locked cabinet. Eli's eyes widened. Is that it? The serum? Marcus nodded, breathless. It might be. With the alarm still ringing and the undead closing in, the group sprinted toward the exit, the precious vial their only hope. Bursting into the daylight, they didn't stop running until the facility was far behind. Safe, for now. Eli held the vial tightly, feeling its weight, a fragile promise in a world gone mad. Jen wiped sweat and grime from her face. This changes everything. Marcus looked ahead, resolute. We take this back to the others. We fight. Eli nodded, a spark of renewed determination igniting inside him. No matter how dark the world became, their fight was far from over. When all else fails, the will to survive, and to protect, would be their greatest weapon. Would you like me to continue with Part 7? The road back from the quarantine zone felt heavier than the journey in. Every step was shadowed by the weight of the vial Eli carried, the tiny glass container that might be humanity's last hope. The group moved in silence, the early morning mist wrapping around them like a cold shroud. Even the boy walked more cautiously now, sensing the danger in the air. Jen broke the quiet. Do you really think that serum will work? Marcus glanced at the vial, then back at the fading horizon. It's experimental. Unproven. But it's the only chance we have to turn the tide. Eli tightened his grip on his rifle. And if it doesn't work? Sam, still recovering from the attack, looked pale but determined. Then we keep fighting. Because giving up isn't an option. As they neared the bunker, a faint sound caught Eli's attention, distant but distinct, gunfire. Hold up, Eli whispered, signaling the others to take cover. Peering through cracked foliage, Eli spotted a small group of survivors pinned down in a clearing, surrounded by a horde of undead. The survivors fought fiercely but were clearly outnumbered. Damn it, Jen muttered. We can't just leave them. Eli scanned the area. We have to help. But we need a plan. Marcus nodded. We create a distraction. Draw the undead away so they can escape. Using whatever they could find, the group set makeshift traps, noisemakers, flares, anything to divert attention. Eli led the charge, firing carefully to lure the undead toward the woods. The horde shifted, groaning as it followed the sound. Behind the chaos, the trapped survivors broke free, racing toward safety. Back at the bunker, the rescued survivors were a mix of weary faces, men, women, even children. Eli introduced himself and the others, explaining the situation with the serum. One woman, Sarah, stepped forward. We've been out there too long. We don't have many supplies left. Jen shared their own dwindling stock. We'll have to ration and find more. This fight is far from over. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat alone outside the bunker, vial in hand, staring at the fragile glow of dawn. The possibility of a cure was both a beacon and a burden. Could this small vial really reverse the nightmare that had consumed the world? Suddenly, footsteps approached. It was Sarah. You're carrying the future in your hands, she said quietly. Eli nodded. If this works, it could save us all. Sarah hesitated. But what if the cure brings new dangers? What if the virus mutates again? Eli looked up at the sky. Then we'll be ready. We have to be. Days passed. The group trained, planned, and fortified their position. Hope flickered, fragile but fierce. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. But in the heart of darkness, when all else fails, humanity's greatest strength was its resilience. Would you like me to continue with Part 8, the thrilling conclusion? You said. The morning sun rose slowly over the bunker, casting long shadows across the battered landscape. Eli stood at the entrance, watching as the survivors prepared for what might be their last battle. Word had spread quickly, rumors of the serum and the hope it brought had drawn more survivors, but also more danger. The undead had grown bolder, smarter, and larger in numbers. The evolved creatures were leading relentless assaults, testing every defense. This is it, Eli said, voice steady but low. If the serum can work, we have to get it into production, and fast. Jen handed him a makeshift rifle, her eyes fierce. We'll cover you. Marcus checked the weapons cache. We've rigged the bunker to hold for as long as we can. But they'll come in waves. Sam gathered the youngest survivors, preparing them for safety. The boy looked up at Eli, gripping his hand. "Will we be okay?" Eli smiled, a rare warmth breaking through. "We fight to make sure of that." The first wave hit just as the sun reached its peak. The sound was thunderous, the moans, the shuffling, the crashing of debris. Eli and the others held their ground, firing carefully, conserving ammo. The evolved undead led the charge, their unnatural speed a terrifying sight. Jen fought fiercely beside Eli, taking down creature after creature. Marcus's voice crackled over the makeshift radio, coordinating defenses. Inside the bunker, the survivors worked feverishly. Marcus carefully prepared doses of the serum, each one precious. Eli knew the key wasn't just to survive the assault, but to turn the tide, to bring hope to a broken world. Amid the chaos, a creature broke through the barricade, lunging at Eli. Time slowed as Eli dodged, then fired a precise shot. The monster fell, but the threat was far from over. As the battle raged on, Eli made a decision. "We can't just defend. We have to go on the offensive." He rallied the strongest survivors. "Tonight, we take the fight to them. We destroy the source of these evolved undead once and for all." Jen looked at him, determination shining. "Let's finish this." Under the cover of darkness, the group moved silently toward the infected zone, an abandoned city center now crawling with the dead and their twisted commanders. Eli led the charge, heart pounding. The serum was their weapon, but courage and unity were their shield. Explosions lit the sky as they breached the stronghold. In the final moments, Eli confronted the source, a grotesque, towering evolved creature that had once been human but was now something else entirely. The battle was brutal. Eli dodged, struck, and finally delivered a decisive blow. The creature fell, its death cry echoing through the ruins. With the source destroyed, the horde faltered. The undead began to lose coordination, their menace fading. The serum, combined with the survivors' courage, was turning the tide. As dawn broke, Eli stood among the survivors, weary but unbroken. The war wasn't over, but the fight had shifted. Hope was alive. When all else fails, it was that hope, and the strength to stand together, that would see humanity through the darkest times. Would you like me to help you summarize the entire story or create a YouTube-friendly title and description for it?